It began innocently enough. Jim Carrey, known for his high-energy antics and razor-sharp wit, walked onto the stage that night not just to entertain, but to unsettle. He wasn't holding back, not for the cameras, not for the network, and certainly not for Jimmy Kimmel. Carrey started weaving a seemingly harmless story about late-night television. He exaggerated his body language, pacing like a cartoon character, stretching his limbs, and pulling faces that already had the audience in stitches. But then, with the precision of a scalpel, he slipped in the first jab. You ever notice how some late-night hosts laugh at their own jokes more than the audience does? He asked, pausing for effect. His voice cracked into a mock giggle, his shoulders bouncing in a dead-on parody of Kimmel's infamous self-chuckling habit. The crowd recognized it instantly. Laughter erupted. Carrey's timing was flawless. He waited, allowed the laughter to build, and then raised his eyebrows like a magician about to reveal the trick. It's like they're trying to convince us it's funny, like, see, I'm laughing, so you should be too. You know who I'm talking about. The audience went wild, roaring with cheers, whistles, and applause. Everyone knew. Carrey didn't need to say Jimmy's name. The imitation had done the work. His smirk widened as if to say, yeah, I said it. Kimmel, watching from his own stage monitors, couldn't hide the strain. The camera caught his forced grin, that tight smile hosts wear when they're the joke rather than the jokester. For once the balance of power had shifted. Jim Carrey was holding the cards, and Kimmel was the punchline. The first strike had landed, and the crowd wanted more. Carrey didn't waste the momentum. With the audience already eating out of his hand, he pushed further, this time going for the very heart of Kimmel's on-air persona. He leaned on the mic stand, slouched slightly, and lowered his voice into a dull monotone, imitating Jimmy's long-winded opening monologues. Welcome to the show, folks. Tonight we'll be discussing why bread has crusts, why politicians don't keep promises, and why you're asleep before the punchline lands. The audience cracked up, some people literally slapping their knees. The impression was brutal, painfully accurate. Everyone who had sat through one of Kimmel's dragged-out intros knew exactly what Carrey was mocking. Then, with perfect exaggeration, Carrey shuffled papers on the desk in front of him and sighed deeply like a teacher bored of his own lesson. See, it's called a comedy show, Jimmy, not bedtime stories for insomniacs. If I wanted to fall asleep to someone reading cue cards, I'd watch C-SPAN. The crowd lost it. Applause thundered across the studio, waves of laughter rolling so loudly that Carrey had to pause for nearly a minute. He let it wash over him, a master at letting silence amplify the humiliation. Carrey straightened up suddenly, his eyes wide, his tone animated again. And you know the best part? He laughs at the end, like he just solved world hunger. It's the only punchline where the audience thinks, bless his heart, at least he tried. The camera panned to audience members, wiping tears of laughter from their eyes. Kimmel's own band looked torn between professionalism and pure amusement. A few smirks slipped through, captured by sharp-eyed fans who later plastered those frames across Twitter and Instagram. In a few short minutes, Carrey had dismantled Kimmel's persona. The faux confidence, the overlong setups, the chuckling at his own weak punchlines. He didn't scream, he didn't rant. He simply exaggerated the truth, and the truth hit harder than any insult ever could. And this was only the beginning. By this point, Jim Carrey had the studio completely under his control. The first strikes had already exposed Kimmel's habit of laughing at his own jokes and dragging monologues into the ground. Now, Carrey shifted gears, moving from parody to a broader takedown of Jimmy's place in Hollywood. He leaned on the mic stand with exaggerated exhaustion, mimicking the tired posture of someone who's heard the same story 100 times. Then, in a sly, almost conspiratorial tone, he said, You ever notice how Jimmy Kimmel's interviews feel like déjà vu? Like you've already seen it? Because you have. Fallon did it. Colbert did it. Ellen did it a decade ago. And then, like a rerun nobody asked for, here comes Jimmy. The audience howled, gasps mixed with laughter as Carrey feigned flipping through imaginary cue cards, rolling his eyes, dramatically as though stuck in an endless loop of recycled Hollywood anecdotes. And he acts like he's getting the scoop, like, tell me that story about your dog one more time. The audience loves it. No, Jimmy. The audience is begging for mercy. The crowd erupted again, clapping and stomping their feet. It wasn't just a roast anymore. It was an inside joke that Hollywood insiders had whispered for years, finally broadcast for the world to laugh at. Carrey twisted the knife with one more perfectly timed punchline. Jimmy's greatest achievement isn't comedy. It's convincing Hollywood that reheated leftovers are a fresh meal. And the crazy part? They keep serving it, the studio roared. Even the cameras shook slightly as operators struggled to keep steady while laughing. And on Twitter, the clip of Carrey mocking Kimmel as Hollywood's reheated leftovers spread like wildfire. But Jim Carrey wasn't done. Once he had dismantled Kimmel's stage persona and his reputation as Hollywood's rerun machine, he went for something sharper, something personal. He dropped the impressions and stood tall, his voice lowering for impact. Look, Jimmy's a nice guy, but let's be real. He's basically the substitute teacher of late night. We watch him when no one else is on. The crowd exploded. The laughter was different this time, not just amused but vicious, the kind that signals an audience has turned against its target. The chant of "Ooh!" echoed across the studio, the universal sound of a crowd recognizing a brutal knockout. Carrey, sensing the energy, pressed harder. He mimed writing on a chalkboard, droning in a monotone voice. "Okay, class, settle down. Tonight's lesson is celebrities pretending to be relatable." The impression of Kimmel as a dull, unremarkable authority figure was devastating. Audience members were doubled over, some clapping uncontrollably, others gasping at how far Carrey was willing to go. The substitute teacher line hit a nerve because it wasn't just funny. It felt true. Kimmel had always been seen as the safe choice, the filler host, the guy networks relied on but audiences rarely raved about. Carrey grinned, savoring the chaos he had unleashed. I mean, Jimmy's not even the teacher who brings pizza on Fridays. He's the guy with the broken VCR cart showing us reruns of a movie we didn't want to watch in the first place. The audience lost it completely. Whistles, cheers, applause. The studio had transformed into a comedy club with Carrey as the headliner and Kimmel as the punchline. And the worst part? The camera caught Jimmy's expression again, that same forced grin, the look of a man laughing at himself because he has no other choice. Jim Carrey had roasted Jimmy Kimmel not just as a comedian, but as a persona, as a brand, as a man. And in just a few lines, he had reduced him to the butt of Hollywood's most humiliating inside joke. If the live studio audience thought they had witnessed something explosive, the internet took it to a whole new level. Within minutes of Carrey's roast hitting the airwaves, clips flooded social media platforms. On Twitter, X, hashtags like a Carrey destroys Kimmel, substitute teacher Jimmy, and Jolly Jim said it, began trending in the US and then internationally. Users looped the footage of Carrey's substitute teacher line, pairing it with gifs of exhausted classrooms and snoring students. One viral tweet read, "Jim Carrey just turned Jimmy Kimmel into the human version of a VHS tape. It racked up over 500,000 likes in less than 24 hours. TikTok creators jumped in instantly. Some slowed down Kimmel's forced smile, overlaying dramatic music with captions like, 'When you realize you're the punchline.' Others stitched Carrey's monologue with Kimmel's most awkward man-on-the-street skits, hammering home the contrast between Carrey's sharp wit and Kimmel's safe comedy. Within a day, TikTok compilations of the roast had gathered tens of millions of views. Instagram Reels leaned on aesthetics. Fan edits framed Carrey as a gladiator entering the arena, cutting Kimmel down in front of a roaring crowd. The substitute teacher bit was captioned, "History will remember this." Even YouTube Shorts carried endless reaction clips with commentators slowing down Carrey's delivery, breaking down the timing, and praising how each punchline built to the knockout. Memes spread like wildfire. Side-by-side images compared Kimmel with substitute teachers from iconic movies. Carrey's impersonation of Kimmel's laugh became a sound effect used on gaming streams, prank videos, and even political memes. For once, the internet wasn't just laughing at Kimmel, it was celebrating his destruction. The speed was astonishing. Within hours, Carrey vs. Kimmel wasn't just a late-night skit, it was the conversation of the week, dominating feeds, reaction channels, and podcasts alike. The internet had already declared Carrey the winner, but then came the critics, columnists, commentators, and comedians who turned the moment from viral entertainment into a cultural reckoning. Entertainment reporters praised Carrey's precision. Variety ran a headline: "Carrey cuts deeper than Kimmel ever could, rolling." Stone called it the roast that late night needed. Even The Hollywood Reporter noted how Carrey had distilled years of criticisms about Kimmel's hosting style into a handful of devastating jokes. Rival late-night hosts couldn't resist subtle nods. Stephen Colbert, on his own show, teased, "I was going to make a Jimmy Kimmel joke tonight, but Jim Carrey already said it better." James Corden, though retired, tweeted a cheeky emoji, a chalkboard, and a sleeping face, clearly referencing the substitute teacher line. Comedy veterans weighed in too. Bill Burr laughed on his podcast. Finally, somebody called out Kimmel for laughing at himself like a hyena. Carrey just nuked him. Ricky Gervais posted simply, "Brutal, beautiful." Even cultural critics outside of comedy circles joined the chorus. Media analysts pointed out how Carrey's roast resonated because it was rooted in truth. Kimmel represents the corporatized, formulaic version of late-night TV, one op-ed explained. Carrey's takedown was so effective because it voiced what audiences have felt for years: safe comedy is no comedy at all. But perhaps the most damning responses came from viewers themselves. Call-in radio shows, online forums, and YouTube comment sections were flooded with people echoing the same sentiment. Carrey said what we've all been thinking. The consensus was overwhelming. Jimmy Kimmel had been exposed, not just as the butt of a few jokes, but as the symbol of late-night television's decline. And Jim Carrey, the chaotic genius, had single-handedly re-energized the cultural debate about what comedy should really be. If the internet crowned Carrey the victor, then Jimmy Kimmel was unquestionably the loser, and the humiliation was impossible to hide. During the live roast, the cameras had caught every detail of his reaction. That tight-lipped smile, the forced chuckle, the way his eyes darted sideways like a kid in a classroom hoping the teacher wouldn't call on him again. For years, Kimmel had mocked politicians, celebrities, even his own audience. But now the spotlight had turned, and he was exposed. The moment Carrey delivered the substitute teacher line, the audience's laughter didn't just rattle the studio. It rattled Kimmel's carefully constructed persona. People weren't laughing with him. They were laughing at him. The clip of his awkward grin became a meme overnight, captioned, "When the joke hits a little too close to home." Behind the scenes, reports suggested Kimmel was furious. Crew members whispered that he snapped at staff after the show, frustrated that Carrey's performance had stolen the headlines. Executives, however, weren't surprised. "Carrey has always been unpredictable," one insider said. "That's the risk of live TV, but the truth is, Jimmy looked small next to him." And that was the real humiliation, the contrast. Carrey was wild, sharp, alive, the very definition of comedy unleashed. Kimmel, by comparison, looked stiff, corporate, and tired. The roast didn't just bruise his ego. It cemented the perception that Kimmel was no longer the cutting-edge comedian he once pretended to be, but the bland host of a machine that churned out predictable late-night content. The humiliation lingered for weeks. Ratings analysts reported a small but noticeable dip in Kimmel's viewership, especially among younger audiences. Social media continued to recycle Carrey's jokes, dragging Kimmel with each repost. And late-night fans debated openly whether Kimmel's time had passed. It wasn't just a bad night. It was a cultural verdict. If Kimmel walked away wounded, Jim Carrey walked away a legend. What made his roast so devastating wasn't cruelty, but clarity. Carrey didn't scream, insult, or drag Kimmel through dirt for the sake of it. He simply exposed what so many viewers already thought, that Kimmel was stale, predictable, and unfunny. And he did it with the timing, wit, and charisma that only Jim Carrey could deliver. Critics hailed it as a masterclass in live comedy. Comedians praised his fearlessness. Fans celebrated his unpredictability, calling it the Carrey chaos we've missed. Even rival hosts, usually careful not to stir the pot, quietly nodded in admiration. On social media, Carrey was treated like a gladiator emerging victorious from the arena. Edits showed him walking off stage with captions like, "One man, one mic. Total annihilation." His lines, especially the substitute teacher bit, became catchphrases, repeated in comment sections, fan videos, and even school classrooms. For Carrey himself, the triumph was sweet. He had long stepped back from Hollywood's spotlight, choosing selective roles and personal projects. But in one performance, he reminded the world of his unmatched comedic brilliance. He proved that raw talent, when unleashed, could slice through corporate polish and scripted personas like a hot knife through butter. And perhaps the greatest triumph of all? He didn't just roast Jimmy Kimmel. He reignited the conversation about what late-night comedy should be: authentic, risky, unforgettable. When history looks back on late-night television's greatest roasts, Carrey's demolition of Jimmy Kimmel won't be remembered as just another joke. It will be remembered as the night a comedy icon reminded us all why we fell in love with comedy in the first place. What began as a single comedic segment quickly spiraled into a long-lasting humiliation for Jimmy Kimmel. Unlike the fleeting controversies he usually mocked on his own show, this one stuck. The memes refused to die. Weeks after the roast, the substitute teacher joke still haunted Kimmel. College students began referencing it in real classrooms, posting TikToks of themselves whispering, "Settle down. Class, it's Jimmy time." High schoolers repeated Carrey's line as shorthand for something dull and uninspired. Even in corporate offices, employees joked about boring Zoom calls by captioning screenshots, "Today's Kimmel special." Kimmel's credibility as a sharp late-night host eroded. Critics accused him of being too safe, too scripted, too predictable. Viewers who had once tolerated his self-laughter now couldn't unsee Carrey's parody. Every chuckle felt forced. Every monologue felt dragged out. The roast had changed the lens through which audiences viewed him, and the shift wasn't flattering. Ratings reflected the damage. While Kimmel remained a household name, his numbers dipped just enough to send shivers through ABC executives. Rival hosts like Fallon and Colbert saw modest bumps as viewers sampled alternatives, curious to see if others might avoid the same criticisms. Perhaps the deepest cut came from Hollywood itself. Celebrities, once eager to sit across from Kimmel's desk, grew wary of being dragged into recycled routines. Some began favoring rival shows, subtly citing format fatigue. Industry whispers described Kimmel as safe but stale, the one you go to if you can't get booked anywhere else. Carrey's roast hadn't just embarrassed Kimmel. It had punctured the myth that he was untouchable in late night. And once that myth cracked, it never fully healed. For Jim Carrey, however, the night marked another milestone in a career already filled with iconic moments. He didn't need late-night television. He didn't need viral clips. He was already a legend. But his takedown of Kimmel reminded the world of something vital. Comedy still has the power to cut through pretense, to unmask the comfortable, and to spark cultural conversation. Carrey had always been known as Hollywood's elastic-faced clown, the master of slapstick and chaos. But here he showed a different skill, the precision of a satirist, the timing of a master craftsman. He didn't just make people laugh, he made them think about late-night television, about corporate comedy, about authenticity versus performance. Critics lauded the roast as one of Carrey's greatest live moments. They compared it to his early stand-up days when he mimicked celebrities with uncanny accuracy. Others linked it to his legendary talk show appearances, where he often flipped the format upside down. But this was different. This was sharper. This was Jim Carrey proving that even in a room filled with cameras, executives, and nervous producers, he could still own the stage without compromise. For fans, it was electric. Social media buzzed with calls for Carrey to host his own one-off special. Some even begged for him to take over late night himself, even though he'd long since retired from Hollywood's hamster wheel. The desire wasn't really about him hosting, though. It was about seeing comedy stripped down, fearless, and real again. Carrey left the stage that night with nothing more to prove. He had entered as a guest and exited as a conqueror. For Jimmy Kimmel, the roast was a scar. For Jim Carrey, it was a crown. Another jewel in the legacy of a man who could make the world laugh and, just as easily, leave it speechless. The verdict from audiences, critics, and history was unanimous. Jim Carrey hadn't just destroyed Jimmy Kimmel. He had reminded everyone of what true comedy looks like when it's unleashed without fear.